Okay, let's continue our discussion of culture in Europe, and we are going to talk about the other really key piece of identity, language. And we will talk about language throughout the semester. First, I find talking about language really interesting. I hope you do too. And one of the reasons we will look at it so consistently all over the world is because it tells us so much about the people in a place, about how they view the world, and about what we would encounter there. So we will talk about language a lot. We are going to talk both about the dominant languages in Europe, and we will talk about some of the minority languages in Europe, some of the smaller remnants. So let's start looking at a map that shows us the patterns of language in Europe. And here it is. So we have been talking about, looking at a map, seeing what patterns it shows, looking for overall kind of generalizations that we can make, but also looking for things that stand out. So if we look at this map, there's a bunch of different colors, obviously, but overall there's a color that dominates here in the north, that green. We've got a color that dominates here in the south, and then we have this kind of mustard color that really dominates in the east. So we've got something going on in the north, something going on in the south, something going on in the east. That should sound really familiar because that's exactly the same pattern that we saw with religion. And now, is it a perfect match? No, it's not. But this is again a place where we can see that influence of physical geography on cultural geography. That spine of mountains, for example, that cuts across the middle. So overall, we've got a match between the pattern of language and the pattern of religion. We've got the north, we've got the south, and we have the east. And of course, there's some other colors too, and we will look at those in a little bit. This here is Hungary, and one of the ways that you can remember that this is Hungary is that it sort of looks like a bowl. It's slightly curved, so like you have a bowl like you're hungry. So that's a way to think of that. And notice that the color that it is, it doesn't match anything that's around it. So we'll talk about that in the next lecture segment. Okay? But this is the overall pattern. So let's break this down and start looking at the pieces. And remember, right, I know I just kind of said this, but language and religion are key defining elements for identity, and they're very often linked, as we can see here. All right, so let's divide these languages up the way that we are going to organize them. And I'll talk about this in just a minute, but note here that I've said that this is the second level of division on the language tree. Okay, remember that when we get to talking about a document that I've shared with you. So these are the European language families, and those are the three that we just pointed out. The first one that we're looking at is the one in the north. It's represented by the green here, and it's really north of the Alps. And German, Norwegian, Danish, Icelandic, which is up over here. Remember that Iceland is part of Europe culturally, and you can see that very clearly here, right? They speak a Germanic language. All of these are Germanic languages. English is also a Germanic language. In fact, it is the most widespread of the Germanic languages, and it is the most widespread language in the whole world as well. So we've got Germanic here in the north. Then we have Romance languages, and those are that yellow color that we can see down here in the south. We've got the Iberian Peninsula, we have the Italian Peninsula, we have France. Right? So those are where the Romance languages are. These are the southern countries in Europe. And notice that, well, we have Italian and French and Portuguese, right? Those are all Romance languages. Why are they called that? Why are they called Romance languages? Is it because they're like the language of love? Is that what's going on here? No, that is not what's going on here. They are called that. They are called Romance languages because of the ties to Rome. And that's where we get that word, romance, from Rome. Because all of these languages derive from Latin, the language of Rome. So that's why they're called that. And notice now we've got an anomaly here. While we have that pattern of Romance languages being here in the south, we also have this pocket of yellow that's over here to the east, where we've got a separation. So what's going on there? Well, Romanian is in fact a Romance language, but this goes back to historical geography. And this country, this area, was actually founded by a group of Roman soldiers who fought for a long time, and as part of their reward, They were granted a large piece of land. They could go and they could settle somewhere and retire. And they started marching to the east until they found a place that they wanted to go. And there were already people who lived there, but they took over. And their language became dominant. They became the ones who were in control. And since they had brought that language from the Roman Empire, it is a Romance language. So that's why we have this island of Romance language in the midst of pretty much of the third of our language families, the one that dominates here in the east, the one that is all that mustard color, and that is the Slavic branch, the Slavic language family. And it dominates here, obviously, in Eastern Europe. And we are now, as we look at where that language family dominates, we are now getting into another region. We are getting into the Russian domain with Ukraine, with Belarus, and with Russia. But it makes sense. They're right next door. So we have that continuation. So we've got Slavic over there as well. So that's the overall pattern of dominant languages. But there's another pattern here that we can continue to figure out and continue to be able to understand the patterns of languages in Europe better. Because we have, right, that overall pattern, but all of those language families, all of those are part of the same ancient language set. Something called a proto-language. Proto meaning kind of earlier or root. There is a group that all of these families actually came out of, and that is called Indo-European. So it's this very ancient language that ended up changing and shifting and evolving into languages that we are more familiar with. So this Indo-European proto-language is thought to have come from here, from the Caucasus region, which is in between the Black Sea, which we have identified, and the Caspian Sea, which we have not identified. But this little kind of narrow strip of land there is really important culturally. And this is where Indo-European is thought to come from. And then, as you can see from this drawing, it spread out. It spread both to the east and to the west into Europe. Okay? So the hearth, right, we defined that word earlier when we were talking especially about the Mediterranean, the hearth, that origin point of Indo-European is the Caucasus Mountains. Okay? And we call this process of something spreading from one place to another over time. In geography, we call that diffusion, and it is one of the most important ideas in geography because we talk about things spreading across space. So we're talking about diffusion here, and here is another visualization of that, starting here in the Caucasus region, spreading to the west, spreading to the east, and we don't know quite why this happened. We don't know why they became so dominant. But there's one theory that they spread their language with agriculture, that they were farmers and they were very successful farmers. And so they brought their language with them, and they were so successful that they reproduced more quickly than other peoples. And so they constantly needed new land. And so they would move to search for new farmland and bring their language with them. Okay? So there's that idea that it spread peacefully through agriculture. There's also another theory that this language, proto-language, diffused forcefully through war, that they were incredible warriors, and so they conquered big areas, brought their language, and imposed it. Okay? Either way, Indo-European became incredibly important and incredibly dominant. Look how much of Eurasia and the world that this became dominant in. It stretches all the way from Europe all the way to the Pacific coast because Russian is an Indo-European language. So are many, not all, many of the languages in Central Asia. And then Iran and into India, we also have languages that are derived, that are evolved from Indo-European. So it's just huge. And most of the languages in Europe have these same central roots. They are proto-languages. Okay? So I'm going to pause there, and then we will come back and talk about this in a bit more detail.